modern game of football has spanned 3 centuries, 2 millennia. A language understood by all, it has transcended age, race, colour and wealth to become the world's most popular sport. Even space, the last great frontier, has been breached. But despite its universality, football is still dominated by Europe and South America. Begging the question, where will the future challenges come from? Only 7 nations have won the World Cup. It's a privileged club, a club to which only a select few have gained access. For over 200 countries, it's a prize that remains tantalizingly out of reach, leaving an elite group to dominate the game.
Die Brasilianer, weil sie ein unendliches Potenzial an jungen, immer wieder neuen großen Spielern haben. England von der Tradition her, vom Biss, vom Einsatz, vom Willen. Italien von ihren Möglichkeiten, Fußball zu spielen. Argentinien ist zu weit weg, um es im Moment zu beurteilen, aber haben auch oft immer große Mannschaften gehabt. Sicher gehört dazu Deutschland. Frankreich zurzeit ganz oben. Frankreich steht zurzeit über Deutschland, über England, über Italien. Also ich denke, diese Mannschaften, die ich genannt habe, das ist so der Kreis, wo der eine mal etwas besser oder weniger gut ist und der andere so in diesem Kreis.
So what does it take to gain membership to this hallowed club? Germany has been a model of consistency in world football. This is a football culture in which country comes well ahead of club, and that is reflected in the triumphs of the national team.
War für mich jede Weltmeisterschaft, jedes Nationalspiel ein besonderes Ereignis. Und wenn ich dann aufgelaufen bin im vollen Stadion, die Begeisterung groß war und dann die Nationalhymne eben erklungen ist, dann hat man schon einen Schauer gehabt, für sein Land zu spielen.
Brazil are the most renowned members of this World Cup Winners' Club. The whole culture of Brazilian football is geared to the national team and its unique style of play. They remain the only nation to have qualified for every World Cup.
Cada tem seu estilo. Nós temos a nossa ginga, nosso molejo, a nossa maneira de jogar e somos tetracampeões do mundo. Por que que nós temos que imitar o estilo do futebol europeu?
In 1963, Brazil and Germany played each other for the first time. Between them, they had won the previous 3 World Cups. Here were 2 different football cultures that had developed independently of each other, yet both were successful.
Ich meine, gegen Brasilien zu spielen war immer ein großes Erlebnis, weil das ja immer eine große Fußballnation war, die bekannt war, dass sie eben anderen Fußball als wir Europäer spielen, technisch versiert. Wir haben ja immer gesagt, das, was dort einzelne Brasilianer so am Ball können, von der ganzen, naturell her, das könnten wir gar nicht, weil wir uns sehr wahrscheinlich die Beine brechen würden.
75.000 Zuschauer im Berliner Olympiastadion hofften auf eine Fußballdelikatesse. Das Länderspiel zwischen dem Weltmeister Brasilien und Europameister Deutschland, als Spiel des Jahres angekündigt, versprach eine Demonstration erlesener Fußballkunst.
Germany and Brazil have yet to meet each other in the World Cup. But they remain the two most prominent members of the World Cup Winners' Club. At every tournament, they are offered up as potential winners. Success breeds success. But does membership of this club guarantee a passport for continued domination?
Obviamente que nós estamos perdendo também muita qualidade nas últimas décadas, porque se até a década de 60 o futebol brasileiro era encarado internamente como uma ação marginal e que a classe média, a classe alta tinham poucos interesses em participar desse processo e, consequentemente, davam todo o espaço para as pessoas de classe social inferiores chegarem a praticar o futebol a nível profissional. No meio da década de 70 para cá, já ocorreu uma transformação muito grande. Passou a ser visto o futebol como um meio de profissional também para a classe média e classe alta.
With the poor and blacks increasingly marginalized in Brazilian football, the game there has suffered a crisis of confidence. They struggle to maintain their status as masters of the beautiful game. Germany too has suffered. In the second half of the 20th century, the Germans never went more than 2 World Cups without reaching the final. Defeat in the quarter-finals in both 1994 and 1998 was their worst performance since before the Second World War.
Wir haben große Probleme im Nachwuchsbereich, Topspieler wieder an das Weltklasse-Niveau heranzubringen, weil wir uns in den letzten 20 Jahren darauf verlassen haben, dass wir in Deutschland immer gut sind bei Turnieren, dass wir eine starke Nationalmannschaft haben. Und es hat irgendwo alle ein bisschen geblendet. Man hat den Nachwuchsbereich vernachlässigt, vor allem den technischen Bereich in der Entwicklung von Spielern. Und heute bezahlen wir den Preis dafür.
In 100 years' time, it's conceivable that the balance of power in world football could have radically changed. Perhaps in favor of a densely populated, hugely determined Asian continent. Sunday, October 7th, 2001. For those present in Shenyang, this is a day that will live long in the memory. For the first time, China qualified for the World Cup finals.
随着这个本身中国的发展，从这次中国历史性的突破，44年第一次闯进最后的世界杯决赛，在日本和韩国，我觉得本身这个中国足球的前途是很光明的，因为从它这个94年，随着中国的经济改革开放以来，中国足球也走入了那个市场经济，从原来的专业，转为现在的这个职业化。
With more fans, more players, and increasing wealth, China regards itself as future members of the elite club of world football. So why has it taken so long for Chinese football to make its mark?
East beats West on the Highbury ground. Islington Corinthians, white shirts, play the Chinese Olympic team, who train to the last hair on shark's fins and bird's nest soup, nearly make honourable mincemeat of the British side.
China's first Olympic appearance was at the 1936 Olympics. On the way back from Berlin, they stopped off to play in London. Along with the Japanese Olympic team, they were the first Asian teams to play in Europe. After the communist takeover in 1949, the expectation was that football would follow the pattern of other communist countries, where a strong national team was seen as symbolic of a strong regime. It wasn't hard to find talented youngsters. The problem was that Chairman Mao had insisted China resign from FIFA in protest at Taiwan's membership. For 20 years, Chinese teams were deprived of international football. But the philosophy behind sport in China was in contrast to the rest of the world. This was a society where total emphasis was placed on the community. There was no place for the individualist philosophies of the West, especially in football. There were no superstars here.
从某种程度，我觉得是一种精神的体现。本身中国人，我觉得他5000年这个历史的文化有他特定的那个道理。我觉得我们的文化各个方面都不差。
The huge crowds and interest in the few international games that did take place, mainly against other exiled countries, persuaded the authorities to re-enter the mainstream. In 1979, China was accepted back into FIFA.
怎么说呢？因为你也知道，足球在中国是很热门的，可以说列为和世界一样是第一大的运动。本身足球，在中国也是这样，因为你也知道，中国有13亿人口，数以千计、万计、百计的球迷，希望中国能挤进世界杯。
Once back in FIFA, China found the going tough. There were 5 failed attempts to qualify for the World Cup from 1982. It seemed they were destined never to qualify. It took a veteran of 4 World Cups, the wily Yugoslav Bora Milutinovic, to finally guide China through the qualifiers. The potential of this huge nation is endless, but this was just the start. To join the elite club of World Cup winners may take decades.
我觉得我们应该让更多的这些年轻球员来到这些欧洲啊，所谓这种先进的这种观念和理念的这种国外的这种俱乐部，来学习好的环境，让他们来看，所存在的这些差距在什么地方，我们需要不断的改进，包括这些教练员，包括整个俱乐部的运作机制、体制等等这些。
The dragon has awoken from its slumbers. The world waits for it to breathe fire. In India, as in China, numerical superiority does not necessarily lead to football domination. With a population in excess of 1 billion and climbing, they have little or no reputation. Their history blighted by the perception that India is nothing less than a soccer wilderness.
this misconception does exist. I mean, I know when we go abroad to any World Cup, European Championships, the common question asked is, do you people play football? That is, it's very, even amongst knowledgeable football journalists and all, there's this misconception. It all stems from the fact that India plays very little international football.
India's reputation conceals a great football pedigree. With a soccer culture dating back to the 1880s, they can boast the second oldest cup tournament in the world. As early as 1948, they went to the Olympics and shocked opponents with both their skill and their lack of footwear.
In the Olympic football, our first match was with France, and all the 11 players played barefoot. And it was typical London weather, cold, raining, freezing, and we got 2 penalties, and the players' sort of feet, they froze. We would have won that match. We would have beaten France in our very first match. We lost, and a very typical tradition of Indian football. We led 1-0 till the 85th minute, and in lack of stamina, we conceded 2 goals in the end, having missed 2 penalties.
They missed 2 penalties. Even Indian playing so well against France. Can you imagine? France is now world champion. Those were the days. In England, Indian team was so popular, playing barefoot. They were invited by Queen herself, and the king and all they have been so pleased. They were surprised to see a barefooted boy could kick a ball 70 meters in this winter. Barefooted a man can kick 70 meters. They were so surprised. Everybody started testing his legs and things like that when he entered the Buckingham Palace.
FIFA later banned players from playing barefoot, a decision that led to India's withdrawal from the 1950 World Cup finals. Although India hosted and won the first Asian Games tournament a year later, they have struggled since, never seriously challenging their continental rivals. By contrast, their domestic sides have received great support, not least East Bengal and Mohun Bagan, fierce rivals with long, proud histories.
Since 1924, there's been this massive rivalry, a type of ethnic rivalry between East Bengal and Mohun Bagan. It's the biggest derby match in India. In average crowds are 60 to 70,000. The people from the East Bengal region, families who've come from there, what is now Bangladesh, they all support East Bengal, and it runs through the family. It's something like Celtic versus Rangers.
Although the Mohun Bagan East Bengal matches attract huge crowds, the game's popularity has been eclipsed by the successes enjoyed by Indian cricket. While families see cricket as an acceptable living, football is regarded with disdain, leaving it struggling for finance.
In India, cricket is the biggest because it's been marketed very well, it's managed very well. Because I think if you look into 10 years back, it wasn't a big event, but now it's because the commercialization of the game itself has become very big.
In India, the biggest sporting stars are cricketers, not footballers, and the game has suffered by comparison. But when, in 1999, Baichung Bhutia became the first Indian player to sign for a major league, this imbalance began to be addressed.
Baichung is a legend. Then this very revolutionary step of going to England and playing for Bury FC. He's like the first man on Everest. He's done that. He set a trend, and if nothing else, he's made Indian football known in Europe, that India do play football. So Baichung has played a revolutionary role. He's the the silver lining for Indian football, that hopefully he can just somehow propel Indian football upwards and get players to be more professional in their attitude.
Compared to India and China, the Middle East is sparsely populated. It struggled to become part of soccer's world order, defined by wealth. From the 1950s onwards, huge reserves of oil were found in Saudi Arabia and across the Middle East. Their rulers became billionaires, and football, which until 1959 had been banned in some states, found itself courted by amorous patrons. But buying success wouldn't be easy. The Middle East had no tradition in football, and the people followed a Muslim faith at odds with the dietary and leisure demands that football places on players. Jimmy Hill, an English player, coach and broadcaster, was hired by the Saudi royal family in 1976 and charged with the task of creating a national team fit for a king.
It was a very rewarding task financially because, you know, the Saudi Arabia is a very rich country. But it wasn't easy because of a number of things. To them, the most important thing we were doing was hopefully getting the national team to win the World Cup, which they weren't quite in a position to do. They obviously had the money to spend on facilities, so the facilities were improving gradually. Big stadium and things like that were there. I got the best coaches that I could to do the job. We weren't at that stage coaching world-class players or anything like that, but the basics of coaching, it was getting sensible coaches, decent people who would work under those conditions and work really well.
Saudi players never really truly adapted to the English style of play. Instead, it was the arrival of a strong Brazilian contingent who caught the imagination of the oil-rich, trophy-poor nations of the Middle East. Pereira, Zagallo and Didi, legends all, arrived in the 70s and weaved their own brand of Brazilian magic.
Até nós chegarmos lá em 76, as equipes árabes não tinham conquistado um título de grande importância internacional. Ali naquela época começou realmente uma nova era para o futebol árabe. O futebol árabe daquela região, do Oriente Médio. E a Arábia foi à Copa do Mundo, os Emirados foi à Copa do Mundo, o Kuwait foi à Copa do Mundo em 82. Tudo isso mostra o trabalho que foi feito e a melhora técnica a nível internacional.
Even though the Middle East had been transformed, they have done little to suggest they will one day challenge the global elite. Pereira took Kuwait to the World Cup in 1982, where they came bottom of their group. Other sides followed. All have failed. As such, the question remains, can money ever substitute skill, passion, history? In the Far East, where football once struggled for recognition, a different story emerges. It was often said that the African continent would be the first to challenge European and Latin American domination of world football. But it's not without significance that Asia was chosen as the venue for the first World Cup of the new millennium. Already giants of the economic world, the governments of Japan and South Korea were determined that Asian football should be woken from its slumber and propelled into the ranks of the global elite.
これはもうね、画期的で、21世紀の日本のサッカーだけじゃないな。日本のサッカー、それから北東アジアのサッカー、フットボールにとってもう絶好のスタート台になると私は思ってます。はい。
But it's an alliance not without its history. Both have much to prove at a political and sporting level.
このアジアの中で21世紀に初めてやるときに、どういう、最終的に共同開催やるということが決まったときに、また新たなね、いろいろ政治的ないろんな今まで日本と韓国とのこの問題っていうのはいろいろありましたけども、これを契機にやっぱり日本と韓国っていうのはお互い もう海峡海を隔てて向こうとこっちにあるわけですから、やっぱりこれを契機に仲良くやっていくというね、今までの歴史上のこといろいろあるけれども、新たな関係をこれから築いていけばいいんじゃないかというように思いますね。
This tension has defined both their political and football destinies.
1919년에 우리가 이제 한일 합방이 됐지 않습니까? 그 전에는 이제 축구가 상당히 활성화됐고, 그 뒤에는 한일 합방이 된 이후에는 그 일본을 이기기 위한 하나의 이 감정의 응어리를 풀기 위해서 축구가 많이 유행이 됐고.
In 1936, the Japanese sent a football team to the Berlin Olympics. It was decided that the Korean players and their Japanese colonizers would play a match to determine the best possible squad. Unfortunately, this show of inclusiveness was just that, a show.
그 선발전에 우승한 게 우리 조선구락부가 우승을 했어요. 그러면 조선구락부 중심으로 해서 올림픽 팀이 구성이 돼야 되는데, 정작 그 대표 선수에는 김용식 선생과 김영근이라고 하는 두 분이 대표팀의 일본 대표팀이 된 거죠.
Two became one when, after a pre-Olympic friendly, Kim Hwang-ga chose to ignore the tactical advice of his Japanese coach. Although this deviation had won them the game, Kim was vilified.
야단을 쳤으니까 속으로 내가 일본인이라면은 과연 그랬겠느냐 해서 일본식 이제 목욕탕에 가면은 나무로 된 이 세수 대야가 있습니다. 그걸로 코치의 등허리를 힘껏 내려치고, 나 대표 선수 안 하겠다, 일본 대표 선수 안 하겠다, 나 조선으로 돌아가겠다 해서 한국에 온 에피소드가 있습니다.
Kim's one-man blow for Korean autonomy hardly affected Japan, who went on to record a very impressive 3-2 victory over Sweden in their first Olympic match. 9 years later, however, Korean independence was achieved. The Japanese forced from the country, and the 38th parallel established as the boundary between North and South.
제가 이북에서 혼자서 왔어요. 이북에서 해방이 된 겨울에 제가 그 38선을 넘어왔어요. 제가 대표 선수가 됐다고, 그러니까 지배하고 그 커뮤니케이션이 있을 수가 없어요. 편지 같은 거, 무슨 전화 같은 건 일대로 안 되니까. 라디오만은 돼요, 라디오. 라디오는 이북에서 틀어놓으면 들으니까. 서울방송국의 라디오. 우리 아버지는 그거 듣거든요. 근데 그 들으면, 저 자리에서 들으면 잡혀가요. 우리 아버지는 잡아가겠으면 잡아가라 하고 듣는 거예요. 근데 라디오에 내 이름이 났어요. 대표 선수가 됐다고 이름이 났어요.
Hong lived to regret this change of allegiance. In 1948, the Koreans went to the London Games, where, after a commendable victory against Mexico, they were beaten heavily by the eventual winners, Sweden.
제가 골키퍼인데 12골을 적었어요. 저도 참 많이 먹었다 생각했는데, 12골까지 먹고 9골까지 셌어요. 그때 왜 9골까지 셌는지 보니, 그때 미국이 이태리한테 그 전에 2회전 할 때 미국이 이태리한테 8대 0으로 졌어요. 야, 9골 먹고 여기 미국보다 더 틀렸구나.
Those who played in the 48 games returned to a country on the verge of a long and bloody civil war. And when in 1953 an armistice was signed, football had become a long-forgotten memory. A year later, their passion was rekindled. World Cup qualification for the 54 tournament meant a playoff against the Japanese. By turns, a tempting and repelling prospect for Syngman Rhee, the South Korean president.
이승만 박사는 건 아주 일본이라면 뭐 순위가 일 가는 분이 아닙니까? 그리고 그 대 조건이 홈앤아웨이 시스템이란 말이에요. 일본하고 한국 어떻게 왔다 갔다 일본 사람 한국에 들어올 수 있어요?
Rhee refused to allow the Japanese into Korea to play the home leg, and both matches were played in Japan. Old wounds had been opened, and after a 2-2 draw in the first game, the Korean players drew on a barely suppressed sense of nationalist fury to win the decider.
그 결과가 첫 게임에 5대1이라는 스코어로 승타행 진익이 이렇게 등졌을 때 5대1이라는 스코어로 이겼어. 그 전에 일본 나라에서 처음입니다. 일본 여역이 저희 국립 경기장에 하늘 높이 태극기하고 일본 일장기를 놓고 길을 태극기를 하고 일본 일장기를 놓고 시합을 해가지고 우리가 이겼어요.
Back in Seoul, the team was paraded through the streets and hailed heroes by a nation who had neither forgiven nor forgotten the Japanese occupation. When these celebrations ended, the problems for Korea began. Their epic journey to and arrival in Switzerland marred by a series of blunders.
양복을 이제 단복이라고 맞춰 입었는데 비행기에서 이렇게 가다 보니까는 이 양복 이 뭐 옷감이 나빠서 바지가 이게 다 이렇게 올라왔어요. 올라와 가지고 스위스에 가서 딱 내리니까 바지가 이렇게 된 거죠. 이렇게 짧아가지고. 그러니까 그 스위스 사람들이 네 나라에서는 그 바지를 짧게 입고 다니는 게 유행이냐라고 그 질문을 해서 선수들이 상당히 그 부끄러웠다는 그런 얘기도 있었습니다.
Korean morale was restored by the promise that every last player would get a chance to grace the World Cup stage.
이게 처음이자 마지막일 것이다 그랬어요. 그건 솔직한 기분이에요. 꿈이냐, 그래서 거기 가서도 좋은 얘가 헝가리하고 한 20명이 갔는데 선수가 20명이 헝가리하고 갈 때 하고 그 다음에 터키하고 할 때 나머지 사람들이 안 뛴 사람들이 터키하고 할 때 승부에 상관없이 다 뛰자.
Though commendable, Korea's decision resulted in two crushing defeats.
The Koreans, to make their long journey by plane, it's cost them more than £10,000. And in return, they've had a 9-0 drubbing from Hungary, and now it rather looks as though they're going to get similar treatment from Turkey.
However, the almost irrepressible good humour of the Koreans was a reminder that for them, the most important battle had already been won.
And in days when international sport has become so important, it's pleasing to see the sporting manner in which these Koreans take their defeat. It's a lesson for all those who are defeated in this series.
2 years later, Korea won the first Asian Cup. Confidence restored, the Koreans would surely now have a platform from which they could assault the 58 World Cup.
FIFA로부터 출전 신청서가 축구협회에 왔는데 그 출전 신청서를 가진 그 전무이사가 그 국제부 직원한테 그걸 신청을 해라 했는데 이 친구가 서랍에 넣어두고 깜빡 잊었던 거예요.
Such disasters have tended to mask Korea's lofty position in the world. Finalists at the 86, 90 and 94 World Cups, they are the highest-ranked side on the continent, the face of Asian football. By contrast, the Japanese have been almost invisible, only mounting a serious challenge in the 90s.
93年の5月に J リーグ、日本で初めてのプロサッカーリーグが開幕しまして、で当時の強豪であります、ヴェルディとそれからマリノスというチームでそのオープニングの試合やったんですけど、国立競技場がですね本当にもう満員のお客さんでいっぱいになって、その時に日本のサッカーの関係者の方々みんなもう目に涙してたんですね。でその時要するに初めてこうトップのレベル、日本国内のトップレベルの、リーグが組織されて、でそこから向こう、3年ぐらいはもうとにかく J リーグもブームになって。
Although the J-League announced the arrival of serious professional football in Japan, the game had been around for longer than most realized.
サッカーっていうものが急にJ リーグの時にね現れて、まあでもサッカーに携わってた人っていうのは、日本サッカー協会が、表しているようにもう80年以上の本当はサッカー協会の歴史があって。
But beyond the formation of their FA, there exists a more significant history. For the Japanese can lay claim to being one of the game's earliest exponents. Kamari, a sport played over 1,400 years ago, proved ball sports were popular. But in the 20th century, it was baseball, not football, which caught on.
野球はもうすごく長い歴史が日本にあって、でもう最初に人々の心をキャッチしたのがサッカーよりも野球だと思うんですね。
Football held little appeal for the people of Japan. But after their defeat in the war, there began an extraordinary period of rebuilding and economic growth. Growth that would give birth to the great Japanese corporations and, in turn, the first wave of great Japanese players. Amongst these was Yasuhiko Okudera, who between 1977 and 1986 made a successful career in Germany.
奥寺さんのようなそのプロの選手が現れたっていうのは本当にいろんな意味で日本のサッカー界にとって刺激になったと思うんですね。要するに、日本人でもそのブンデスリーガというその世界でも注目を浴びているトップリーグでやればできるんだ、実際にできるんだっていう実績を証明、その実績を残してくれた。
Despite Okudera's success, it wasn't until three unlikely individuals appeared in the 1980s that Japanese football finally emerged from the shadows.
で1980年に入って小学校の生家に、サッカーが取り入れられて野球は外された。そして1980年同じ時にキャプテン翼というね子どもたちに一番人気のあるアニメが出て、で一挙にサッカーブームが起こって、そこから底辺がどんどん広がりだした。でそれが今の J リーグにつながってるんだよね。
A year after Tsubasa exploded onto the screens, Zico, a Brazilian legend, went to Japan to coach club side Kashima.
O futebol ele sempre existiu no Japão, mas não de uma maneira profissional. Então criaram uma liga e acharam que poderiam dar um bom desenvolvimento. E eu acreditei nesse processo. Eu, quando fui para o Japão em 91, não fui com o pensamento de jogar. Eu fui com o pensamento de levar a minha experiência profissional, ensinar aos jovens japoneses. Mas a qualidade técnica era tão menor que eu acabei com 39 anos de idade jogando e me destacando e podendo ensinar aos japoneses, não só dentro do campo, como também fora.
All Japan needed now was a homegrown Zico. a real-life Tsubasa, someone who could make flesh their comic book fantasy. He was found, somewhat improbably, playing football for Flamengo in Brazil.
まあ15、16で子供だったんでね、漠然とプロになってブラジルでサッカーのプロになってお金を稼ぎたいっていうそういう子供心というかね、割と簡単に考えてましたし、まあ、ブラジル行ったら学校の勉強はしなくていいと思ってたし、サッカーだけやってればいい、サッカーでプロになれる、そういう考えで漠然といましたけど。はい。
Returning to Japan in 1991, Miura generated great media interest. His experiences in Brazil were widely reported, whilst his starring role for Nissan in the 1992 Emperor's Cup confirmed his prodigious talent. But perhaps, most importantly, in a country obsessed by trends and fashion, his good looks made him a marketing dream. His every fashion move replicated and admired by an army of fans. It was on the back of this explosion in interest that the J-League was born.
サッカーに携わってきた人は93年に急にサッカーができたとは思ってないんですけど、周りの人たちっていうのは、それまでサッカーも知らなかった人、お年寄りから子供まで、実際サッカー人口っていうのも増えたし、そういうことまでだんだん今 J リーグを通してで J リーグに来た外国人、また海外で経験ある人たち、監督やスタッフ、いろんな人がやっぱり、プロとして J リーグに参加したことで、そういうサッカーの仕組みというかね、世界というものが分かった。
At an international level, Japan have tended to underperform. Having qualified for their first World Cup in 1998, they failed to win a single game. Nakayama's goal the highlight of a disappointing tournament. Limited success has, however, been achieved at the Asian Cup, proving that Japan are at least matching their continental rivals.
そうですね、アジアカップ92年に、優勝して以来、日本はそのタイトルから遠ざかっていて、それをまたその手に戻したのが、2000年の、10月レバノンに行われた大会で、フィリップ・トルシエ監督のもとに、その戦って、優勝したんですけれども、あの優勝の意味っていうのはやっぱり日本が、その国際レベルである程度のことができる、認知されるためにやっぱり必要なことだったと思うんですね。
With the exception of North Korea's performances in 1966, Asian football has failed to challenge the established world order. As a consequence, the award of the 2002 tournament to Japan and South Korea places a great responsibility on the nations to progress.
やっぱり世界から見たらちょっと、ヨーロッパ、南米、アフリカ、その次の大陸としてしか見られてない、アジアでね、ワールドカップが開かれて、でもっとサッカーというものを身近に感じられて、世界のレベルも身近に感じられて、それがやっぱり、アジアのサッカーのレベルアップにつながるし。
While Asian triumphs at the tournament will infinitely boost their world stature, sustained progress will continue to depend on the sport of football's governing body FIFA, whose responsibility it is to support and promote its developing nations.
그 일본도 축구 관계자들의 얘기를 들어보니까 그 부분에 대해서 약간의 불만을 가지고 있는데, 특히 그 아시아나 아프리카 쪽에 이 유럽이나 그런 그 아메리카 대륙의 축구 수준이 될 수 있도록 끊임없는 지원을 좀 그 다른 쪽보다는 좀 많은 지원을 해서 축구가 그 5대륙이 모두 이 수준이 높아져서 그 균형적인 발전을 했으면 하는 바람입니다.
It is a dream held by many that the gulf between the nations of the world will eventually collapse, leaving most, if not all countries, with an equal chance of success. While fanciful, it's a model which is becoming increasingly replicated at an individual level, as talented players from every corner of the world sign for the major leagues.
Football is played all over the world, and it's played by all the countries, and everybody loves this game. You'll have good players from places where football is not big at all. You might have some superstar coming from Somalia. We might have some superstar coming from Nepal as well. Playing in AC Milan, playing in Manchester United or Barcelona, Real Madrid in a couple of years' time. You never know, because it's a universal game and everybody wants to play this game and wants to make it big. So you never know.
The game has come a long way. In the course of 2,000 years, it has been transported from the courtyards of the Japanese nobility to the playing fields of the poorest nations on earth, and through extremes of joy and pain has become one of life's few universals. A unique, shared experience. The beautiful game.